Just waiting for the live streaming to start. Very good. Well, we're going to get going. Well, morena everyone, and welcome to the Strategy and Operations Committee meeting for Thursday the 9th of June. It's a great day to be in Kapiti if you're a Canadian. Is it goose or geese? Goose. Very good. And welcome to staff and to our members of the Kotahitanga Board. Fantastic to see you all here today and joining us for our hui. I'm going to move to item number 2, which is the council blessing, and hand it over to our Deputy Mayor, Janet Holborough, to read it.
Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana i ngā take ke mua i o mātou aroaro. E pono ana mātou ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara huapai mō na hapuri e mahine mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa ki a whaihua, ki a tōtika ta mātou mahi, a matamaia te tira whakamua me te hihiri, ka taia te arahi i roto i te kotahitanga me te aroha.
Thank you. And Russell and Kim, out of 10, how did Janet do? Was that... got some critics in the room? That very good. Look, got thumbs up. Very good. No pressure. We'll move on to item number 3, which is apologies, and I have apologies from Councillor Bernie Randall. And did we have any further apologies? Not that we're aware of. So if we could have someone move those apologies. Moved by Councillor Halliday, seconded by Councillor Boswell. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, and that is carried. Any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda? Councillor McCann, I'm sorry, I should have touched base with you at the start. What do we normally do around the... oh, that's probably in publicly excluded. Yeah, sure. Okay. Again, I'm not aware of any, don't see any hands up, so we'll move on to item number 5, public speaking time, and there is none. Very good. Item 6A, members' business. There is no responses to public speaking because there is no public speakers. 6B, leave of absence. And I'm just taking a quick look online. Sorry, look, welcome to those online. I apologise for not acknowledging you at the start of the meeting. I don't see any leave of absence hands coming up there either. Item 6C, matters of an urgent nature. Again, none have been made aware to me as chair. And so move on to item number 7, updates, and there is none. And so straight through to item number 8, the reports, and just noting that we will be moving the schedule of the agenda a little bit just to accommodate our guests today from the Kotahitanga Board, and we will be having them up first, and I'll just get you the page number, and that is, thank you. And so that is on page 146, and we have members of the Kotahitanga Board at the table today. And I guess for the benefit of anyone that may watch this either live or after a recorded, Neil, if you want to just introduce yourselves, whether you want to introduce your team or whether they want to introduce themselves individually, but I'll hand it over. Can I just check whether staff are introducing the report and then through to Neil? Just straight through to Neil. So Morena, good morning to you all, and fantastic to see a full complement of the Kotahitanga Board here today. And also, I believe we have, who have we got online? Is it Scott? No, we've got George Hickton. That's right. And sorry, apologies from Scott, wasn't it? Right. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much. And
sorry, I'll just get
that.
Thank you.
Right. So I'll start again. Tēnā koutou katoa. Look, thanks for the opportunity, and I'd just like to introduce the team that are here today. And that's Chris Claridge to our right. Chris, we won't go into CVs, it's just our names really, at this stage. Kim Tahiwi, Russell Spratt, and Humari Schultz. So that's the team. Missing one, and George, I'm sure you'll wave or something. I can't even see George, actually.
Can I just check with Team Services that we do? George, here we go.
George is here. So look, each of them are going to speak to the paper today in various key activities. So I'll just do a brief overview, and then we'll go into to them speaking, and then we'll just do 2 questions afterwards, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, look, we secured funding about November of last year for a range of work, and we focused on feasibility studies, on sector strategies, on funding application, the destination management plan, and the workforce plan. So that's been the body of work that we've been focusing on. And overall, we've made good progress, and you're going to hear from the individual board members on different aspects of that. And we're due to have this work completed by the end of July, which is just a mere 7 weeks away. So that's a bit scary in lots of ways, but it's all on track at the moment. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, the Economic Development team for the excellent work that they have they've provided, both advice and support to the board over the last 6 months. It's been exemplary. Another feature of this period has been broadening and deepening the relationships with key players, key public sector agencies and others, but in particular Kanoa and Wellington, New Zealand. And so we've had funding from them over the last bit, this Wellington, New Zealand and Kanoa, and support in various ways, especially around some projects. And we're also now looking ahead and seeing how we can work together in this coming financial year. We also want to spend some time in this next 6 months at looking at options to see how the board can be more effective in its engagement with central government agencies and private sector investors. So that may actually point to changes in the current business model. So we're going to come back with recommendations on that in the next 6 months. And as per our terms of reference, we want to complete a review of the strategy and implementation plan and present our proposals to you. We've worked with what we inherited, which is a very high standard strategy and implementation plan. We're now much more understanding of what our environment is, and we want to be able to put our collective brains and thoughts into how we might be able to reshape that in some way or form in the next 6 months. So that's ahead of us. So look, without further ado, I'd like to, George, get you started if you could. I hope I didn't explain why you're not here. You've got COVID, and I hope you're not feeling too poorly to be able to do your bit on the destination management plan. So over to you, George.
Kia ora, Neil. Yes. Kia ora katoa, nā rara mihi kuhui mai nei tēnā koutou katoa. Yes, I'm very sorry I'm not there to the committee today. I had intended to go, but I got up not feeling well, tested positive for COVID, so that was the end of that today. I thought I'd avoided it.
We're glad you didn't come as well.
yeah, I think you are. Look, so please forgive my fogginess, but I thought I'd start by just highlighting the fact that we've been brought to get together by the Kotahitanga Board to look at this plan that's been formulated for the visitor environment in Kapiti, and it's essentially the destination management plan. This is the document. There are a lot of these floating around the country at the moment. I'm seeing them in other zones. These have come out of a general desire by the government to look at the way tourism regenerates itself within communities, to ensure that it's done in a way that is actually more sustainable, more acceptable, and also perhaps more economically viable than what we've had in the past. And it's this whole sort of regeneration of the tourism industry. And what we're seeing nationally now is very strong recovery in that industry, particularly towards the end of this year. But these plans they all vary a little depending on the organisations. This one, I'd have to say, for Kapiti, I think is an excellent plan. Our board has looked at this and certainly adopted it as a template for us to work with. It's different from others, and that's probably because of where Kapiti sits at the moment in its development. And I would almost describe this as a starter pack, and that's a good thing because it does highlight 5 key areas that we need to work on. Now, this won't be an overnight success, but I think given the history of tourism promotion and development on the coast, it's the right thing to be doing at this time and actually to set the foundations in the right way. It's since we've come together at sort of at the start of this year or just late last year, we've begun taking a number of actions really around three key areas. The first one is industry connection, and that's going to culminate in an industry function next week on the coast. We have 100 participants in that, and that's where we're looking to establish their understanding of the board, its role, also their connections to one another as an industry, because we're finding that is something that needs to be developed, and also get a sense of the communication processes that we'll use in future. We've also introduced a Facebook site for the tourism industry, and in addition to that, we've started a regular newsletter system which will go out as well. So that's the first part of it, is actually to, in a sense, show the industry to itself, and connecting people up and to ensure that we begin to get a seamless visitor experience. The second part of it is the destination story, and that's just looking at a consistency about how we present the Kapiti Coast to visitors, and that we are starting to provide businesses promoting the coast with consistent imagery, with consistent stories, and there's a lot of work to be done on that. I should say, sitting also alongside that is obviously the iwi connection, so we have two representatives on our board who are looking after that side of it. We're working on telling the cultural stories more effectively as part of the destination story that we're building. The third area we've been working on is really a bit of a gap analysis on the tourism industry product that we have, and what we might begin to look at developing in the future. We do have gaps in commercial property, the commercial accommodation. That's something that the new hotel will be welcome in that regard, but there is a shortage overall on the coast of this sort of accommodation. We also have a need for more of these facilities that are well-marked, and the reason for that is that gets you media attention. It gets people like Tourism New Zealand will use those properties to actually have people stay and write up stories and that sort of thing. It's how you get your free press, basically. So our program manager, Janice Hill, has been working quite hard with a number of the industries to get them sort of up to standard, but more to understand what the opportunity is as far as the visitor market that's going. When we look to the future, we see three very positive elements that we need to connect up. One is Te Urahi, which is at last going to highlight our icon, our national icon, to the visitor. Secondly, the advent of a hotel on the waterfront there, we know will have an impact on people's overnight stays, and also the amount of time they spend in the district. And thirdly, Transmission Gully is having a significant impact on people's access and confidence to access the coast and all that it has to offer. We're beginning to look at what we might be doing as far as the product development side of things as well. And there are a number of areas here that we think are worthy of further investigation. The potential for us to have a taste trail in the Tahura region using the cycleway network that's been developed, which is now becoming quite extensive. You know, as a region, we're nearly fully connected with an off-road cycleway north to south now, which is becoming very popular. Our understanding is 50% of the people using that are from out of district, which is really good. The potential also for us to start to develop a walking festival in the hinterland, and also the further development of the Barrier landfill experience and what we might be able to do for that in the future. So there's a lot to do. We've started the process. I think what we're wanting to do here as a board is give the industry confidence that there is a plan, which is a good plan, and we're working on that, and over time we believe this will have a significant impact on how the Kapiti Coast benefits from a positive visitor industry. And for those, I've been in tourism a long time, but essentially tourism is what we sort of call the weightless economy. It's how you get a lot of economic impact without having to build a lot of infrastructure. And we think there's a real opportunity for that to continue to develop in the Kapiti area. So we're excited by the task, and we're getting on with it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much, George. Can I just check with you, Neil, before we move on? I'm thinking it's probably better we get through your speakers and then open up for questions and then allocate to where you think they're best answered, because some of the questions that might be asked might be answered by a further speaker.
Indeed,
Are you happy with that approach?
Absolutely.
Very good. Look, thanks very much, George. If you don't mind waiting there, we'll move to the next member of the Kotahitanga Board, and we'll open it up for questions at the end.
Thank you very much. So Russell is next off the blocks.
Kia ora, Neil. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mana kia koutou. Nice to be speaking this morning and speaking about the Education Hub. I just wanted to give a bit of context first. You'll all be aware, of course, of the link between this kaupapa and the Workforce Development Plan that has been developed by Council. And so I just wanted to speak to that briefly as we move through the progress to date. So as it relates to the Workforce Development Plan, you'll recall that we were looking to, or the plan looks to improve effective pathways, result in better jobs, and to bolster a resilient economy. And in addition to that, there are some of the strategic investment objectives include, but aren't limited to, education and training, employment and careers, connectivity, and workforce skills, and a diversified economy. So that's been uppermost in our mind as we looked to engage a consulting firm to assist us with our endeavours to better understand the requirements of the community as it relates to workforce development, to training, education and economic development. I imagine that you know that we engaged Volt, and I'll be speaking to some of the work that they are in the process of moving through at the moment. That work's not complete, so my report to you today is just an interim at this stage. So just in terms of where things have got to with the feasibility study, a needs assessment is working its way through, and the case for change has been developed within that document. A feasibility study is being progressed and the development options progressed through the period May and June. Identification of a preferred option coming up in June, and then the development of a high-level commercial and financial case looking to be completed for review June, July. And then there'll be the development of outputs, and that report will be ready in July as well. So that's a bit of an overview for you. In terms of the status update, the component parts include a stakeholder engagement process, but that's largely been completed. And then there has been a desktop review and research that has been completed. And then the case for change has been developed as a consequence of that. And then following from that and taking a needs assessment and socialising with the education providers within the area has also been completed. And then there'll be the consultation process for change as a consequence of that. I want to now just briefly speak to a workshop that was conducted recently with stakeholders in the region. Just a few things to speak to there. So following the workshop, there had been the identification of 5 possible draft options for consideration, and those at a high level are: 1, do nothing, a business as usual approach. The second is to centralise an education hub. The third, a distributed model. The fourth is mobile, which describes what it is, that we go to where the learners are with mobile solutions. And then the fifth is a multiple small trade tech hub. As this review process is completed, the information around each of those categories, of course, will be much easier to understand because it'll be fulsome. But in the interest of just giving you an overview today, I'll just speak to those in that form. And then there'll be the alignment to the strategic investment objectives, and draft success measures will be developed in order to evaluate those options. And just speaking again at a high level in relation to those, issues such as attracting students into training, taking training to learners, options for study, care and support of akonga or students, connectedness to employers. And then some of the identified critical success factors include strategic alignment in terms of investment objectives, capability alignment to what's available within the region, potential achievement and feasibility, readiness within the region, and then finally affordability. So as you can tell from those highlights, there's a lot going on, there's a lot to consider, there is much more to report back on, but we're heartened by the fact that progress is being made and that the feasibility study is progressing in earnest. In terms of next steps, we're looking to ensure that the engagement is completed. There are as yet the engagement with iwi is less. How do I describe this? It's not as deep and wide as we would like, and there are issues associated with that which will be known. Pre-treaty settlement entities, resources, all those kinds of things. But nonetheless, we're continuing on with that, and a big shout out to Kahu, who's taking a role in that regard to give an oversight. And we're looking, of course, then to identify what requirements are within that Māori community, along with other communities, of course. And then following up with the iwi and other engagement activities, we'll look to determine student demand, confirm long list options for providing services for those, determine the critical success factors and prioritise the criteria, and then shortlist the options for review. And that's the exciting part. That's when we'll be back to you with what we hope will be some very exciting and potentially positive developments for the coast in producing an education hub that suits our rohe. Kia ora.
Thank you, Russell. Kim, Regen project, if you could talk to that, please.
Kia ora tātou. So I'm just going to give you an update on the Regen horticulture project. So last year it came to our table, and when it did come to our table, we discussed the high desire for this to be strongly led, iwi-led. So that was one of the things we were looking at very early on. So we wanted to engage iwi very early on in the process, and part of that reason is that the initiative, the whole regenerative horticulture, aligns very well with the holistic approach that is intrinsic to Māori horticulture, and so that's a big part of the project. So initially we met with some landowners and iwi entities in Otaki to just gauge their feedback. So from those meetings, we got some positive feedback and a keen interest, and so we continued on. At present, we are currently looking to identify an appropriate vehicle to progress the kaupapa. So we're currently looking at a partnership entity. So we're looking at some entities that might like to collaborate, that we can bring together under one umbrella to progress, firstly, the initial proposal to MPI to kickstart the whole feasibility, and then just looking at combining their resources, their capacity under one umbrella, and so we can bring them all together. So the intention was that this kaupapa would be brought together. We're looking at talking to Ngā Hapu Otaki at the moment. The benefit there is Ngā Hapu has the mandate for all the Otaki hapu, and it can link into all the Māori landowners in the Otaki region, and it's part of the wider Ngāti Raukua iwi. And so the idea is to bring it in there, also using people like the wānanga for the educational capacity, which is also a big part of the Regen project. And we've also had discussions with Otaki Pūrere Trust Board. They are one of the substantial landholders in Otaki, and their land holdings are actually on behalf of art, which brings in Aotearoa Toa. So the board manages the arts lands, which are predominantly in Otaki and Manukau. So we saw them as a good partner to have. And there's still discussions about who else will be involved in that partnership entity. But the idea is to bring them all together under one umbrella. So there haven't been talks with the further Ngāti Raukua whānau to the north in the Horowhenua area, but through Ngā Hapu, we should be able to make those connections. So that's kind of one of our next steps as well, to make that connection further north and to give that opportunity to them as well, because that's where we want to go. It's in the Kapiti Horowhenua area. So we'll be able to do that through Ngā Hapu. And also, because Ngā Hapu has the links in Ōtaki, they'll be able to foster that relationship, so it will make it easier. So then at present, we're looking at getting a presentation with the help of the ED team together, so that we can just give a presentation to our iwi partners to give them a better idea of what this kaupapa is going to look like. The purpose of the presentation is to inform iwi of their potential role in this kaupapa, the potential benefits of this kaupapa for iwi. So it's about land production and how an opportunity for them, another opportunity that they can use to utilise their lands. And also to highlight what the expectations would be placed on them to ensure that any partnership has the current and future capacity needs that would be required to take this project forward. So as you know, iwi are always capacity constrained, and to bring them all together under one umbrella means that we can get land, resourcing, capacity, education and training all under the one umbrella, and so that bolsters the capacity of the actual entity that's going to carry it forward. So some of the outcomes from the project that we think would be one, building skills and knowledge. So the idea is to impart those skills and knowledge into the iwi, and vice versa. And so alternative options to use for productive land use. Also access to funding and the knowledge base, creating employment opportunities, and probably most important to iwi is enabling Māori to have rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga over their own lands in a way that aligns with what they're already doing. So that's where we're at the moment. So our next steps are really to get in front of iwi. Hopefully we can get in front of all of them at once. If not, create those links so we can get in front of them and get the proposal out to them and get their feedback. And that's about it.
Kia ora, thanks,
Kia ora.
Kim.
Well done. Chris, could you go next on food and beverage, please?
Oh, I got the red light. Oh, I thought the green light meant go. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Morena, councillors, Mayor. In September 2019, Fonterra closed the Toroto dry factory. 63 jobs were lost. The factory is empty. Now, just under 3 years later, all these jobs have been replaced. Sustainable Foods have got the factory operational. It's paid rent, it's kept it open, it's employed people, and it's selling its products throughout New Zealand and has a clear vision of where it wants to be in the future. And this has been achieved in one of the most difficult periods in our history. So Kapiti District now has an opportunity to be part of the emerging plant protein industry and to be part of the move to sustainable carbon zero agriculture and regenerative agriculture, and to produce food locally that we can supply to our residents and to people throughout New Zealand, which is a critically important part of building a sustainable community. And the question is, how did this happen? Well, it wasn't by accident. This council saw the need to establish the Kotahitanga Economic Development Board and enable us to help develop a food and beverage sector strategy, which we're in the process of doing. So this has meant that as a community, we've been able to support Sustainable Foods Limited in successful central government funding application to buy processing equipment. We're able to engage a consultant to determine a business model for creating a centre of excellence in plant-based foods that could attract other similar operations to base themselves here in Kapiti. And we were also able to support the crowdfunding of sustainable foods in order to raise capital. But importantly, what we've done as a community through this council and through the board is provide confidence and support to Justin Lemons and his team at Te Drive. We've provided him with the firepower and the credentials to seek support from central government, to help compete for capital and support him in an environment which we all know has been incredibly commercially difficult. Remember, these 63 jobs have been replaced during COVID. So that is a thing that must be acknowledged and celebrated. The question is, what does the future look like? The board is in the process of completing a needs analysis and activities for a food and beverage industry cluster that links to the land and the regenerative project that you've just heard about. Discussions are being held with the 40 local food and beverage companies that have indicated they need support and commitment from the council over the long term. And a final report and action plan will be delivered to you, as Neil has indicated, in July, in 7 weeks. And if I get to the end, and the critical issues is the council will need to commit to support the sector and will have to consider specific actions and initiatives in order to attract and retain the new food entrepreneurs like Justin. Because economic development is about people. And there is an old saying, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. So imagine a district with 6 or 12 Justins, each with 100 staff, processing the food grown locally and further up the coast. Think of the impact that that will have on the health and well-being and sustainability of this community. So the questions that the councils have to ask themselves is, what will make them come here? What will make them stay? And if we answer these critical questions, we can grow sustainably the region's food and beverage industry sector, which will enable that key plank of sustainability of food security and food supply for this district. Happy to answer any questions on this, councillors.
Thank you.
Afterwards, I think.
Yep, and I think we go. Thank you, Chris. We'll go to Haumari
Thank you.
now. Exciting stuff there, though, Chris. We'll come to that at the end.
Tēnā koutou katoa lucky last. I think in terms of the project on intergenerational strategy, we do have a burning platform in Kapiti of an ageing population. In the last census, a quarter of the population are over the age of 65. And if you look at the census forecast in 2050, 50% of the population will be over 50. We know that in the economic development and workforce strategy, one of the priority actions are to connect older people in the Kapiti economy. So we as a board looked at this and decided that if you look at the older workforce, there's no definition anywhere in the world that actually defines what is the older population and the older workforce. It is just normally said everyone over 65. But we know that when you hit 65, and I can say I think the majority of people in this room, you're not going to retire and sit on your deck, have a glass of wine at 11 o'clock in the morning. So the focus for us was how do you define that older population and how do we look at that in terms of the workforce? So we've commissioned some work in terms of looking at this, and the focus area is to say we're going to look at people from 55 to 80. These are people that are still in the workforce, that might not be formally recognised as being in the workforce, but are still working. Why we do look at this cohort is currently data is only 65 plus, so it's everyone over that, but we wanted to define the sector to make sure that we do have a focused strategy. So the structure of the report, which you will also see in July, was around doing a really good literature review on what is out there internationally and within New Zealand. Also to do a very structured data analysis to get beyond this over 65. Then to look at having, and the key stakeholder interviews has also been completed. And part of the next step is to run some key focus groups to look at what are some of the barriers and obstacles and potential opportunities for people in this cohort. So we will be running a focus group in Raumati, one in Waikanae, one in Paraparaumu, and one in Otaki, and then one in Wellington, which will be focused on people commuting from Kapiti to Wellington to work. So what we've seen currently, some of the preliminary literature review, is that we know more and more people over 65 remain in the workforce. And it's not that they want to work, it is because of the lack of financial security. Lack of financial security is becoming the main driver for people staying in the workforce after 65, depending on their health, of course. So we've also seen that older people find it very hard to re-enter into the workforce, and actually older women find it really, really hard to re-enter into the workforce. And then we know that there is significant unconscious bias in terms of ageism of the older workforce. We looked at the data and in terms of Kapiti specifically, and it is quite unique in terms of the older workforce. Now the uniqueness is around that Kapiti has a higher proportional of older European migrants that move to the coast with no connections and no history. The second is we have a high proportion of the workforce commuting into Wellington that also hasn't worked in Kapiti, so also a lack of that connectedness back to Kapiti. Then in terms of the data, there's also a higher share of self-employed that live in Kapiti and that older workforce. When you look at the industries, and we were just talking about the food sector, when you look at the industries that are the higher employers in Kapiti, there's quite a mismatch between where older workers are and what jobs are available. And on top of that, we are a nation of small businesses, SMEs. 97% of our businesses are SMEs. The data dissected looking at businesses in Kapiti, so looking at employment opportunities. So SMEs in Kapiti on average employ 2.6 FTEs, where the national average is 4. So you have a lot of businesses in Kapiti that are family-owned businesses, small businesses, that will actually not employ additional staff. So the strategy will look at all of the literature review, all of the data and the focus groups to look at what are the things that the council can do to support this older workforce to either stay in the workforce or to have opportunities to stay in the workforce or to share some of that. So some of the key focus areas currently that is emerging is connectedness. This is in terms of providing places and spaces. The second one is additional skills and development around technology and technology training. And the third is around creating a positive sort of propaganda around the advantages of this older workforce. So these are some of the emerging trends that are coming out that will be tested with the focus groups. And we hope to, in the next steps, combine all of this information and be able to come up with a strategy that has some really key and tangible focus areas that can be implemented. Kia ora.
Thank you, Kilmari. So that's open for questions, I think, now.
Thank you, Neil. Look, I want to move to Councillor Buswell. I haven't given Angie heads up, so just give you a second or two to think if you want to add anything in terms of working with the team. What I should have said at the start is we've got a jam-packed agenda. We've also got a councillor-only session later today, which we often cancel. So if I can encourage councillors to keep your questions on point and then hand it over to Neil to delegate the team to respond to those. And we'll try and work through, because we only get this opportunity every 6 months. What I do want to tease out with you, Neil, is we may have some specific, I can see Martin shaking and nodding and agreeing with Hilmari there, because it's around his portfolio and whether there's an opportunity outside of this meeting for individuals to catch up with yourself to, to sort of ask some further background stuff, because we, in terms of limitations, I don't want to curtail the discussion.
Yeah, so absolutely, that should be encouraged.
Very good. Yeah. So look, I'm just going to come to Anne to see whether she wants to add, Councillor Buswell, anything to the discussion, or we'll open it up for questions from there.
Look, it's an absolute honour to be a part of the Kotahitanga Board, and You know, 2 weeks ago, I personally had one of the best weeks ever in council, where we could proudly say that we were instrumental in getting $1.2 million out of the government pockets into our community, which is phenomenal to help sustainable food. So, and then on the back of that same day, we had Brad Olson come and talk to us about the state of the economy and actually how well our economy is holding up. And I think that that was also really great. But just hearing all the projects that each and every one of you are contributing to in our community is immense, and what you are doing for our community is changing the dial. And so I really look forward to seeing the progress on all the projects that are happening. And yeah, really flattered and honoured to be a part of it.
Thank you, Ange. And look, I jotted down just so I didn't forget that it's so impressive and exciting what the team have achieved and progressed. I say achieved because there is some wins on the board, and progressed because there's other work underway. So I just didn't want to forget to acknowledge that it is, you know, having been one of the councillors around the table that has supported this model, it's really heartening to see how far the group have come. And I just, thank you all for your contributions. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. Please don't get offended if I ask you to cut your question down a bit and get to the point, because we want to make the most of their time today and get through. So we have first up Mayor Guru.
Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. My first question, can I just give you a little background? The Chief Executive and I had a meeting with John Allen from Wellington NZ. From what I gather, that organisation itself is under funding pressure, and we know that we want our pound of flesh from the investment that we put in that direction. Having said that, my response to him was that Kotahitanga aims to look at becoming a self-funding entity. Can you explain to us what your strategic thinking is towards that direction? That's my first question.
Neil, just before you do that, because I'll dovetail off His Worship's question, because I had similar, and it was around your comment in the report around the EDKB model and the limitations.
Yep.
So I think they're very similar, and to add to that question, my comments was, you know, where would the team like to go to from there in terms of becoming, having more teeth, I think I've heard you say.
Absolutely, yep. Look, it's a work in progress. Certainly we are socialising different models within the board. But at this stage, it's too early to unless we contextualise it properly and present it properly. It's too early to say definitively what specifically the model should look like. But certainly, we've got to transition from where we are into something which gives us a lot more teeth, as I've said before.
Thanks, Neil. Can I just pause there for a minute? Mark, if you or anyone in your team want to join the table to be able to respond as well, just feel free. Your Worship, do you have any further?
Yeah, I've got a couple more. My second question is generally to George Picton, but the nature of the question may involve other responses. Today, I think, is the settlement date for Safari Group's investment in the Hotel Parapam Beach, 42-room hotel. George, can you tell me the approach in economic development, when it's silo thinking, it's not each project. I know the hotel brings a whole range of benefits, but there is a need. Is it accurate to see that as a need to see a cluster of issues that raises the tide for everybody? What I mean that is, what is the link between the hotel and the Tigurihi project, which has been criticized as a project in itself? What is the link between these two and the close proximity of Paraparaumu Golf Club, World Standard Golf Club? What is the link between these three and the food hub that's been developed just a kilometer away? And what is the link between all this to having a small local airport that can service that? I'm just throwing that question for, I'm on a fishing expedition.
Just a small question for you there, George.
and explore the world. George,
Well,
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. In a sense, I think the link is relatively obvious. It provides the ability for people to stay in a location on the coast with presumably excellent views, access to the beach, but at the same time have on offer a range of other activities so that they can spend longer in the region. First of all, Kapiti Island, obviously, it would be of particular benefit to people wanting to go to the island, either just for a day or for overnight. In addition to that, there's now, with Te Urahi coming on board, there's now obviously a lot more understanding and interpretation of what's going to be on offer within the district. And as you've mentioned, the golf course as well. So I do think it's a bit of it is a link in itself because, and I've seen this happen. If I could just give you an example, as you know, I chair Hawke's Bay Tourism. The advent of Porter's Hotel in Havelock North has had a significant impact on the quality of the experience within the town because people are staying in town, accessing the restaurants, the shopping environment. And I've noticed over the last few years just a general rise in the quality and the benefit of that experience. And I believe that that's what's going to happen with this new hotel development.
Thank you, George. Your Worship, did you have one further question?
The Provincial Growth Fund, when we had that triggered off, I captured that process in terms of this phrase, let 1,000 flowers bloom, in terms of the number of ideas that came out of that time. Do we still have a catchment database of those ideas that came out at that time? It'll be useful to see whether some of the ideas are still viable. I know that the age, the industrial, the employment perspective of the age was one of the ideas that was raised at that time. It's not something new, but you've added so much more onto that. So, you know, I'm just signaling the need to have a look at that and not let it go to waste. Right. There are a lot of people, passionate people with a lot of ideas. Yeah. That's just a request for that to be done. Right. My other question is on the technology side. Have you had a look at the broadband coverage and the speed available, because that is an area, an economic enabler when you are talking about small-scale businesses that we have. Attached to that is the technology side, is the need for AI, robotics education in our schools in terms of labor. And what I'm saying is they are interlinked.
Yeah. Yes, certainly what we're looking to do is bring the technology, the IT. There's a massive amount of talent locally, and Scott Houston is heading up with the business attraction development person from the ED team to bring these people together and to have some strategic conversations about what is possible and what is not. And certainly there's been talk about what could be, and they're looking to develop a straw man and then having the conversation around that. But also attached to the education and training side is we're looking at AI and other such programs for that to be taught in the region. So certainly it's on our minds. It's early days, but it's acknowledged that there's a need for something to be done in that area.
Right. Thank you. My last question to you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you birthing another question?
This is a cesarean. We are looking at a huge growth in housing. There's a tension between that move towards that and the issue of highly productive soils. I know that the national policy statement on highly productive soils is going to be sorted out next month, I think, the final movement to the parliamentary system. Do you recognize this, and how do we balance this need for housing with the need to protect highly productive soils, given part of the food hub is from the paddock to the plate? So there's a link to our productive soils and the food hub that we are developing in terms of sustainable food and food security, if you like.
Yeah. I might just hand that to Mr. Potatoes Man, actually.
I could just speak loudly. Red for talk. Okay. Good question. Fundamental issue is that the land must be economically viable. If you simply lock up land and it's not economically viable, even if it's highly productive, you've got to be able to utilise water, you've got to be able to utilise inputs, you've got to have labour. There's a whole other things than just locking up land, but essentially, and protecting it from housing, you've got to be able to utilise it. So having access to people with the skills, having access to markets that can provide you a return are critical, and that's why linking the food and beverage production to the land is so critical. Otherwise, that food and produce from that land simply ends up being a price taker. So strategic alliances between food production from land and food processing is really, really crucial. Highly productive land on its own and protecting it won't actually deliver anything. It'll simply just create a block of land that can't necessarily be utilised for its true purpose.
Thank you, Chris. Look, I think we've got Councillor Compton up next.
Thank you. Through the chair, a few questions from me. The first one was picking up sort of on a similar theme to that question, was the work going on around regenerative agriculture. Now, I've worked in the space for a few years, and I'm curious to know whether you've engaged with industry groups like Beef and Lamb New Zealand, who I previously worked for, but Dairy NZ, Horticulture New Zealand. Obviously, you've got Potatoes NZ at the table there. Because I know they've done significant work in this space, and some of it's actually been world-leading in terms of coming up with definitions of what regenerative agriculture means, because it's quite a nebulous concept that means a lot of different things to different people, but what they've generally found is that it actually broadly aligns with how we farm already in Aotearoa. So have you actually engaged with those groups to see what work they're doing in the space? And I know that they're doing a lot of work with their farmers on the ground already there through their extension work.
Short answer is yes, we have. And Chris, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you. Yes, definitions of regenerative. What is regenerative? The same debate happened with regards to organics in the 70s and 80s, so I think that'll be pretty well reconciled quite quickly. This has to be iwi-led first and foremost. Unlocking the land that is owned by iwi is crucial to it. Then once that mechanism is effective and then linking to the people through the local wānanga, then groups like Potatoes New Zealand, Vegetables New Zealand, we're all waiting in the wings to then engage, and that's the next step. So take your point, Councillor, that there is a wealth of material to transfer, but we've got to have a vehicle to put it into. So part of it is constructing a vehicle, which goes to the earlier comments about how do we make the self-sustaining model of the board going forward. There are some constraints on our current model, but creating a vehicle to provide us with the mechanism to create those links to Beef and Lamb, to Horticulture New Zealand, to Dairy NZ is needed.
Thanks, Glenn. Next.
Thank you. The next one is, you're talking about some of the demographic challenges that we face with our workforce here in Kapiti, and your focus was, as you were saying, was very much on the older section of the workforce. But I'm sort of curious to know, given that if we don't address the imbalance in our workforce, we will get to that scenario we're talking about where it's an overwhelmingly older workforce here. But we know that some of the crucial gaps employers have is wanting to hire younger workers who aren't necessarily available in Kapiti because they move out of the region. So
That's right.
what work is the EKDB doing in that space to attract young families into Kapiti, or to get those school leavers to remain in the district and find opportunities here, so we don't have that demographic hole? Because that, for me, that gap in it is, I think, denying Kapiti a lot of the vibrancy, and a lot of the new ideas, a lot of the social and cultural benefits that come with it go missing because of that demographic hole.
Sure. So one of those planks is obviously the education and training hub. The reason why rangatahi and others are leaving here is there is no tertiary institutions, there's no education and training. So they leave and they quite frequently stay away. So that talent is lost. You may be able to sort of expand on that a little bit further, if you would, please.
So it's a jolly good question. So the research that we're doing, the feasibility study, one of its key planks is to identify the area you've highlighted. And as Neil has just said, there's a scarcity of resources at the moment to hold people here, younger people here, rangatahi here, in terms of vocational training and or other training, to be honest. And it's not until we've got that quantified that we'll be able to say to you, here's what we found out, here's the quantification of it, here are the areas that we ought to be focusing on. It may well be information technology, it could be a number of things. I don't want to second guess that. Certainly its objective is to hold them. What we know is that when younger people leave an area where they've been brought up for training and for employment, they're generally gone for good. And so the opportunity to retain and to get the ongoing holistic effect of that for our community is significant to us, the importance of which is not lost on us at all. Yep.
Good question, Gwen. And I remember when Dale Williams, previous Mayor of Aotearoa, and championed the 0% youth unemployment, spoke here and gave figures which we're probably living in the era now, saying that you'll have a youth shortage if you don't do something about this now.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons it's been prioritised as a key sector.
Cool. And just picking up on that, we know that housing affordability is a real key issue, especially when it comes to attracting young families into the district and that sort of gap that we have in our demographics. And we know Kapiti has one of the most grossly unaffordable housing markets in all of Aotearoa, not just the Wellington region. So what role do you see for things like intensification of housing playing in helping to address that challenge, and how that flows through to economic development in the district?
Yeah, I got Chris to do some work on this. Chris, do you want to just respond to that, please?
Thank you. Housing is a national issue. Domestically, we've got real issues here in Kapiti District. How the council works within the new national guidelines for intensification is going to be really interesting. How it works with the NPS for highly productive land is going to be really challenging. It's not a simple question to answer. There has to be trade staff, there has to be capacity and capability to construct. There's got to be availability and ease for developers to undertake that development work, and it's got to be part of a coherent plan, long-term plan that they can see where they can fit. So investment decisions by developers get done easily and efficiently, because the time and energy it takes to engage with local and central government authorities on building is inordinately difficult. So making it easy, simple, straightforward, with a clear, coherent vision of what this council is looking to do and what the community wants is really crucial to signal to developers who won't necessarily come from here but will come from outside. But we know that there is a bank of land coming on stream. We can see the subdivisions starting to emerge on the side beside the motorways. We can see where they're going to go, how we then maintain infrastructure, how we then maintain the basic supplies is going to be a real challenge going forward for this council. So it's not a simple question, it's a package of how you make it easy, simple for people to invest, to build the houses, to enable affordable housing to occur, and at the same time protect the soils that we've got here, at the same time making it easy. may sound really simplistic, but that's what it's about.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Compton, you have any further?
Yeah, I have a few more, but I'll just do one more. I'll behave myself slightly. Now, in terms of this, the measurement of impacts you've given us on the tables here, you're comparing March 2020 to March 2021, and to paraphrase Lenin, there are weeks in which decades happen, and we've had many weeks in which many decades have happened since March 2021. So I'm just curious as to why you haven't used March 2022 data, because I know Infometrics has March 2022 data or provisional data available across a lot of these, and they actually paint an even better picture in many respects to what you've got there. So I'm just, this is data that's now 15 months ago. Is it the wrong dates on that, or is it?
These are March 22.
So we'll just pause there for a sec. Actually, what I'll do, did you have anything further to add to that?
Just literally on the handout here, it's got capiting March 2020
Sorry,
March
my report I'm referring to, which is a 6-monthly report, has March 22.
So can we just pause there?
Table,
thanks, Mark. I was just going to say.
Okay.
Thank you, Gwen. I was just going to see whether we had some any further advice on that. So Mark's going to come to the table. Morena, Mark.
Kia ora tātou. Very, very good question. So, as you know, we always get trapped by what data is available. To provide that measurement data in the table I think you're referring to, where we have full 12 months comparability, that's the latest data we have, is March 2021. But in Neil's report, he made sure he included the very latest figures that we have from March 2022. But unfortunately, they don't match some of the measurements in that bigger table. So we've provided council with both figures. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks for councillors keeping their questions nice and precise. So I'm just going to move to Councillor Pravanov, and then we've got Halliday and Holborough, and then I'll check if there's anyone online. Jocelyn.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for coming along today and giving a really, really interesting presentation. And I have to acknowledge that obviously there's a lot of work that's going on behind the scenes, so congratulations. I have two questions. The first one relates to the area that Russell was talking about, education and training, and whether he wants to answer it, someone else can. So the demographics here in terms of employment, incomes tend to be quite low, and I suppose that there's probably a desire amongst the industries to actually employ some of those people. But I suppose what I'm actually interested to know is whether or not you have identified that those are the areas that education and training should be focused on, or whether you're actually going to be looking at the training, which is much more highly skilled, which would increase the salaries of people that people go off to universities to actually to do.
You okay with it?
Thanks, Russell. Well, it is a work in progress, and when you have a look at the demographic data around earnings on the coast, we are lower than other areas in aggregate, and that is of concern. We've pushed the answering of that question. We looked for answers for the questions in association to this area, to the community that we're looking to serve. And interestingly, at this early stage, we've identified strong opportunity within construction, and construction these days pays pretty well. I'm not yet aware of high earning categories yet as part of the research, so I can't speak to that. It's certainly, when you go back to the workforce development drivers and the strategy behind that, we are looking to improve economic well-being, and so yes, it is a driver in terms of what we're looking to do. So we'll just be interested to see what our community says about that. Yep.
Thank you. So my second question, it's sort of been touched on, or the area's been touched on before, and that relates to what Kim was talking about in terms of regenerative horticulture. And I suppose the focus is around Otaki for that, but also too, I'm wondering how that is going to be balanced with the work that has been done with Papakanga in terms of housing, because there's land up there, and potentially the land that you're looking at, or that is being looked at for horticulture, could also be used for housing.
Yes, so So the idea is that through that vehicle of Ngā Hapu, we can identify those lands because we're in the process of identifying those lands anyway. So in Otaki, you have a lot of Māori land, and then you have a lot of Māori ownership of general land. So you have the two of the mix. So the whole process, if we do it through Ngā Hapu, we can identify the pockets of land that are no-go zones, and we can also identify the ones that are right for horticulture, and then we can also identify the ones that are right for housing. So we can have that discussion within Ngā Hapu to ensure that lands that were earmarked for papakainga aren't being thrown into the horticulture. But you need those links and those relationships to identify those all together. Yeah, so that's another benefit, that we can do all three at the same time. Yeah.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for today's presentation. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to be trying to be very brief. First thing is, for me, I've heard the word straw man. Sorry, don't know what that means. Could someone just enlighten me?
Oh, it's a model that's set up really to engage and to remodel to something that it should be. So straw man is a very old term. Probably reflects more my age.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Look, page 156 in the report, and you don't need to look at it, talks about the Kapiti Coast destination story. It has the KED-KB as a lead, but it also has council as a lead. Just want to make sure there's no tensions there with regards to who is pushing that conversation or who is developing our Kapiti Coast destination story.
The role of economic development team is to advise and support, and ours is to lead.
Okay, that's cool. One question I do have is around the Kapiti brand Kapiti. Is there any work being done in that space, or is that captured in another aspect of the development of the Kapiti destination story as such?
I'll get George to respond to that.
Thank you, Neil. It's always an interesting argument about regional branding. The Kapiti brand is Kapiti Coast. It's already there. It's a question of what does it mean to people, and just referring to your earlier question, we're looking at it from a visitor perspective, and understanding that the Kapiti Coast provides certain experiences that people want to be part of. That's one story. But there are other stories that are emanating from what you've heard in this meeting here today. But all of that goes towards the brand. Ultimately, the brand for the Kapiti Coast is the Kapiti Coast. We can't get away from that. It's what we make it mean that's important. And simply stamping something on top of everything else doesn't essentially work. We've got to quietly build the experiences that go behind that, so people start to understand and resonate with what it offers them. So that would be my answer to that.
Thank you, George. You can tell we're keeping all the easy questions for you. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you very much for the answer to that, George, and I do appreciate that. But I look, say, for champagne or cognac or something along that sort of line, these sorts of brands or brand recognition, which Kapiti has, stands for quality. And I'd be very interested to see how we look at capturing the quality brand that potentially could be Kapiti from a generic perspective rather than a specific perspective, so that people do business in Kapiti know that people that are purchasing a product from Kapiti, it's
Martin, do you have a question there, or you?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you,
Kim. Just want to very quickly touch base. You talk very, very Otaki-centric, and I understand the reasons for that. But are there any relationships being developed in the Te Tūhoro area, or is that sort of encapsulated altogether?
So yes, so that's all encapsulated together. So when we do have our discussions, we also have discussions behind these discussions with art. So we're also in direct relations with art, and so we're also, having those discussions, letting them know what's going on, so that because in the Otaki region there are art and there are toa whānau, so it's a matter of putting it out to all our whānau, all the iwis, and also further north. So that's the link. That's the link that we can provide through Ngā Hapu. So definitely, it's not Otaki centric. It's wherever the opportunity is and wherever that fits that we're taking that discussion.
Make an appointment to have a coffee with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. I only have Deputy Mayor Holborough up. last, and Councillor McCann's just popped up, and anyone online, please pop your hand up. I see Councillor Hanford as well now, so over to you, Janet.
Thank you, Councillor Coots. Ngā mihi nui mō te kōrero I tēnei rā. It's just incredible what's happening, really, really wonderful. But I just want to touch on the creative sector, and I understand there's a lot going on. So, and I read on page 165 of the agenda on the action plan that the creative stream of work is under review. I just wanted to know, because in that table it seems like quite a discrete piece of work, whether the opportunities for creativity in the arts are being considered within the various work streams, for instance, education, tourism, connectedness, and the intergenerational kind of work, and whether you'd be interested in, in having a conversation about that if that isn't happening already, as a kind of thing that kind of weaves through the different pieces of work rather than being seen as something discrete and separate.
The conversations are really just starting. I know that Humari has met with a couple of key people in the sector, and it's really just starting. So, a work in progress.
Well, really good timing as we start our strategy for supporting the arts. So to ensure that strategy sees the arts as something that generates revenue, generates jobs, generates education, helps to sort our demographic problem, feeds into our visitor economy, feeds into our work around education, rather than something that we just support as a discrete kind of activity. I think there's a real opportunity there. So be interested to have further conversations.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And forgive me, questions are not meant to be criticising, they're just to try and educate myself, which I'm often told I need to do more often. One of the issues that I heard raised about that demographic hole that we have in our community was around tertiary education. Is it also not around the type of services and activities that we have for young people in our community? Because I note with dismay that 10-pin bowling, for instance, was closing, very much a family exercise as opposed to perhaps teenagers. But are we actively looking at that aspect, not that can hold or pull our young people in a direction of remaining here, or is it more narrowly focused just on education?
No, it's not narrowly focused at all. The workforce plan is going to spawn a number of projects, but what we've done, I guess, is prioritise where our efforts have got to go, and we can't please sort of everyone in the sense, but certainly alongside that and in parallel to that, there'll be other projects that will be tackling that area.
So when you've talked about talking to the community, or I can't remember the exact words that were used, have we also been talking to our youth and to parents about what they want in our community to hold them here?
We've been speaking to employer groups and other larger demographic groups, iwi Māori, and then specific work areas. We've not, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't been engaging with parents and young people at this stage. That may or may not be a future part of the project. I don't think it's folded in at this early stage. So I can't be more definitive with my answer.
Can I clarify, Russell, understanding what Councillor McCann is asking, because of the work plan, and not just the workforce plan, but the ED plan, there are specific priorities, and some are higher priorities, some are lower, and there's timeframes as well. So I imagine part of the answer sits amongst those tensions. Okay. Councillor McCann, back to you.
Thank you. Obviously, that I'd be very keen to see that stakeholder engagement widen to ensure that we're hearing from their voices, because ultimately it is their decisions that you're trying to influence. And I know how much I listened to my parents at that age. So,
look, I did have some discussions with Sophie about 6 months ago, actually, and we were looking as we move into sort of a governance approach with how these things are going to evolve. Certainly, we were looking to ensure that demographic was included in that process.
The other thing that I note that we haven't talked much about was the airport. I know His Worship the Mayor brought it up, trying to link it to a number of positive things in our community. But has your board had discussions with the Templeton Group, for instance, because there seems to be a lot of potential opportunities for that land, and we can't just assume that because it's been an airport, it will always remain an airport?
The short answer to that is yes. We've had the airport's owners come to the board and present what their plans are. At this stage, they are very in the formative stage, so that we've just listened, and we're in a listening mode really to see what is going to happen and how we can align to that, but nothing really has come from those discussions at this point in time.
Good to hear that the communication has been open. It's really pleasing. I noticed Councillor Compton brought up housing, and there was a fair discussion. And one of the comments that was made was about the ease that developers need to be able to work in our community. So I was wondering what your thoughts were as the councils tried to perhaps bring back amenity values, which rather undermine some of the clear direction that the government's been trying to progress to ensure intensification. So I was wondering if you had any comments for the council around that.
Apologies, Councillor McCann, but I do think we're deviating off topic for the ED board in terms of amenity values and so forth. Neil, if you want to respond to that.
No, I'd rather escape that way.
I didn't want to put you in a position where you're a bit out of your depth. I understand the point Councillor McCann is making, and but back to you, Councillor. Do you have any further?
Yeah, just one more question. When we're talking about the sustainable foods, and you were talking about some of the opportunities, some of the drivers that might bring other people back or to our community, I was wondering whether one of the main drivers there is that there was a ready-made factory, because what I didn't hear was what discussions with those owners you had to understand why they came here.
Yeah, Chris had the conversation, but certainly it was a big factor as well.
So how do we progress bringing other manufacturers here when we can't replicate that particular factor?
Can I just check, because I think I saw Chris was about to respond there. Did you want to add something, Chris?
Happy to add. Yes, I've spent some time with Justin understanding the drivers, and we're feeding that back into our food and beverage strategy. So the plant the factory is only half utilised at this stage. So there is other space available. So yes, that was a factor, but without Justin coming, you wouldn't have the factory utilised. So it's a sort of it always goes down to the people. You've got to give them confidence and support them and enable them to do it. The factory is one point, but it's not the only point. It's about giving them confidence and tangible support.
Sorry, there's always that pause, and it's not necessarily just the cogs in my brain whirring over. Look, thank you very much for those answers, and I've just got one final question. There's discussion about the board becoming self-funding. I wonder whether that's really possible and whether we should be looking at making more of a commitment, because I don't understand how that process could occur. And I think in many cases, councils can play a very significant role in the community, but it requires saying we're going to fund something like the board. Or is it because you are looking at trying to have more independence? I'm interested in...
Look, I don't think we brought up the word self-funding at all. We're looking at different models to see how we can engage more effectively with key stakeholders, and some of those key stakeholders are obviously private investors. So, but again, I want to have this conversation when we've done our work and we can present it to you in a way that we've thought of all of these things and come with a recommendation that is sensible.
Look, thank you very much for those answers. Keep up the great work.
And we're going to go to Sophie online, and then I think that is all, and we'll wrap it up from there. Morning, Sophie.
Cool, morena ngā mihi nui kia koutou. That was an awesome kōrero, and loved the questions as well. Just a couple of questions. The first one being, obviously, It's great to hear that the Kotahitanga Board is continuing that focus on kind of youth remaining in the district through both provision of more education and training, but also through understanding what young people want and need to be able to call this place their home for longer than they potentially are at the moment. A question I have in relation to that is what kind of advocacy role the Kotahitanga Board is taking in terms of, to central government in relation to investment. And obviously it was awesome, as Angela mentioned, to see that investment into sustainable foods of 1.2 million and the kind of, again, the acceleration of what's happening in that space. And that, I think, is a really awesome opportunity for, showing that Kapiti has climate conscious jobs that young people will hopefully be interested in. But what kind of other advocacy is the board focusing on at the moment?
Kia ora. He pai ki te pātai. The truth is nothing specific, and the reason for that, and it doesn't diminish the importance of the question, the reason is, again, and I'm sorry to rely on it, it's just that we haven't finished the assessment yet. Certainly it behoves us to look for whatever funding we can at a time when we understand what it is that people are looking for. And we certainly will not shy away from the responsibility of making approaches to central government agencies to achieve that.
Thank you, Sophie.
That answers that question. Just one other one in here too about obviously the exciting development in the sustainable business network space for the district, and wondering how the Kotahitanga Board is making use of its connections, both as each of you as individuals who have extensive connections into the community and business networks, how you're supporting the growth of that, and recognising that it was mentioned in the report that, great, that's a tick, there's been one set up, but what do you see as being your role in continuing to expand that network?
Oh, it's essential that we do. What's been interesting in expanding that network has been the fact that we're now connected to Kanoa. Kanoa, we were part of a cohort that was Chatham Islands, Wairarapa and Kapiti. We now are part of a cohort which is Taranaki, Whanganui, Manawatu, Horowhenua and ourselves. So our networks have just grown through Kanoa and their networks, and there is an incredible amount of opportunity that sits there that we can all use as a board, and that's been created because we are this board. But also individually, we have utilised the individual networks in a lot of cases, and are continuing to do that. So that's part of our DNA, really.
Thanks, Neil, and thanks, Sophie. I see the weather's remarkably improved in Paikakariki than here in Paraparaumu.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just have one more really quick part,
Sure.
if that's okay. And would like to echo Councillor McCann's kōrero about the importance of hopefully pretty soon and quickly increasing that wider engagement to our community, to demographics that exist, such as our young people, which, as Councillor McCann eloquently said, we're trying to hopefully change the decision making of, or just make it more, make it more attractive to remain here. And so just wanted to, probably not a question actually, but just a comment to say that I'm really keen to loop back into that kōrero, so I'll connect offline and see, or at an appropriate time, Neil, if you let me know, but really happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Councillor Buswell, I see you're up next. I had a couple of questions myself. Were they questions, or did you want to, I take it, probably move the recommendations? So look, just a couple from me, team. Sophie touched on it a little bit around advocacy, and with the recent decision from central government not to fund the, and I'm surprised Councillor Compton didn't raise it, the trains to Otaki, do you see a opportunity or a role there for Kotahitanga Board to provide some weight and advocacy around that argument through jobs and education around public transport links?
Yeah, I think it's an integral part of a number of the projects that we're doing at the moment. So I do, in short, yes.
Thank you. Look, the team have used the word product, and I personally understand what you refer to there in terms of the offerings that we have on the Kapiti Coast. We've heard from Councillor McCann that the Kapiti 10 Pin has just announced its closing. We'd had a tour of Dirt Farm, and there's the risk of that potentially either closing or going into hibernation. I guess in the space of having limited product and looking to attract new product, how critical is it for the board and the council to play a role in retaining product like, for example, Dirt Farm?
I think what we've got to realise is that we've got finite resources. The board is focusing on and trying to complete a number of things. We've got to be careful that we don't overextend ourselves and do things in a sort of in not a professional way. So we've just got to identify what our priorities are, and if we see anything that comes into like for that example, then we would give it look at it on its own merits. But at this stage, we haven't thought about that, to be honest.
Thanks, Neil, and I appreciate I had linked council in there as well, not just solely the EDKB. And the last one was to you, Russell, around the work that you're doing there, and just noting our involvement around the Māori Economic Development Fund. And I guess what I wanted to raise for you to comment on was sometimes the alignment that occurs in other work that either council does or other organisations, and some of those synergies. So there was discussions around supporting Māori business, it could be non-Māori business, and then potentially the role that the hub could play, or so there's a lot of synergies that are out there that we sort of see connecting the dots. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, yes, to say that I agree with that thought, and that there are, and I know that recipients of grants, the Māori Economic Development grants being notable among them, are grateful for council's tautoko in that regard. And I think speaking to Māori education as it relates to vocational training within the hub, there is a big opportunity there for us to further investigate that. That's actually it. I mentioned it earlier. We will be relying on Kahu and others to try and tie those parts together. It does present, at the moment, there's a bit of a barrier there, and it's in terms of being able to have those conversations, find a meaningful place to land. There is going to be a place, and again, it's a very high priority for us, and thanks for raising it. It's tricky, to be honest, but the opportunity is great.
Thank you. And the opportunity there to work alongside some of the other grants and stuff that we've got there to support that.
Well, it's true, and actually it speaks to the demographic gap. So when you have a look at unemployment and non-training, Māori youth are unfortunately disproportionately represented in those that don't have the jobs and don't have the qualifications. And so therefore our emphasis in that area is very real and important.
Thank you. Yep. Look, before we wrap up, Neil, is there anything further you want to add? And then we're going to, I think Councillor Buswell would like to move the recommendations, and I'm happy to second them. But
no, I think that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Good.
Thanks for the opportunity. I do appreciate it.
So I'm just going to move to Councillor Buswell. I have slipped an additional recommendation through to staff with your indulgence to support, and I'm not too sure whether Tanika could bring that up on the, or the team could bring that up on the screen.
Well, that's been brought up. I just want to over the last couple of months, really, I've been reflecting on my last 6 years as a councillor, and I just want to throw out a little bit of hope for particularly around the housing strategies and climate change strategies, and that this economic development strategy took 2 years to actually land, of bloody hard work, not only internally but along with the community. Worked really hard to get this up and going, and honestly, 4 years down the track of moving that along, we are seeing some really, really positive changes within our community, and I think that I think that's marvellous. I'm really, really proud of our community and our council to get on board with how important economic development is for our area, and I'm pretty sure that it won't lose momentum in the next triennium. So I just want to put that out there. And also a massive shout out to our staff. We have got an amazing team that are working really hard behind the scenes to back up the Kotahitanga Board, as well as delivering BAU. So kudos to them as well.
Thank you. I'll take that as a right of introduction. and the additional recommendation there was acknowledges and thanks the Kotahitanga Board for its efforts and positive progress, just so that we've got that recorded. And then if we could also, Tanika, just note our thanks, the council's thanks to the ED team. That was both acknowledged by the Kotahitanga Board and councillors in terms of their tremendous efforts. So some wording along to that effect, because I think that shouldn't be missed either. So opening it up for debate, we've had a right of introduction from Councillor Buswell. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Appreciate we've been going for 45 minutes, but I think it's been worthwhile having the conversation. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, I also want to echo Councillor Buswell's words as well, being very much part of that journey, and it's very satisfying to see where we're at the moment. Personally, I'd like to thank you as well, Neil. It's been a long journey with regards to where we are, but here we are, and what great things we're seeing. I just wanted to flag health as an area of new opportunity potentially with the new health reforms coming in, both in attracting health-related industries, but conversely ensuring and attracting health provision for Kapiti residents. We've got the wellbeing to take into consideration with the new legislation that's coming through. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I'll be very interested in the board having a connection with the Kapiti Health Advisory Group, which we've started to instigate. As noted before, we're very encouraged to hear and see the economic team working very closely with the council teams as well. It's great to hear that everyone's working across the various teams in council, which is really encouraging to hear as well. I also want to note to ensure that small business representation or voice has a space to be heard as well, and I appreciate that a lot of foundation building has been done from a regional basis, but there is also those small things that can be done as well, and that's those immediacy type things. We can very easily get caught up in the bigger picture, but it's our smaller businesses as well that need to see people coming in sooner rather than later, but not being a reflection on the work that's being done at all. It is great seeing the work that's been done with the Ramati Business Association. I guess this is more to the economic development team, and I'm looking forward to that being potentially duplicated at Parapara Umu Beach, just throwing it out there at the moment. I'd like to thank the ED team and also the economic development, or the KEDKB, TB, all these acronyms, for the experience and contacts that you guys bring to the table and the progress that's occurring and the partnerships that are forming. This is great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. I also want to join my colleagues in thanking the Economic Development Board for their work. And I think when we look back over this triennium and what the economy has gone through, I don't think any of us could have remotely imagined what the world would have been like, or what would have happened back when we took our seats in October of 2019. But I guess as we've sort of trying to think of the right way, because it's not quite a new normal yet, but as we've emerged from the world of lockdowns into this possibly temporary way of operating, we've seen Kapiti has been well placed to benefit from a lot of the things that have been going on, such as closed borders have meant that the domestic tourists haven't been able to go offshore. We've benefited from Transmission Gully opening, and we can see that in the traffic volumes of people who have been streaming up to Kapiti to come and see things here. But I think the real challenge is what happens over the next 3 years, because we've had that shot in the arm from tourists only being able to travel domestically and spend domestically. We've had that shot in the arm from the boost in work from home, and we've seen that in the retail transaction card data that's come through. We've had the shot in the arm from Transmission Gully and the novelty that that's brought. But now we're entering into a world where a lot of the old pressures on Kapiti's economy are going to start reasserting themselves. We're seeing that already with the pressure on workers to return to Wellington to help out businesses in the Wellington CBD, and that's perfectly understandable. We sort of rise and fall together as a region. But we're also seeing it in terms of international borders reopening and tourists flocking overseas. I look at my Facebook feed and it's full of friends heading off to Australia, heading off to Europe, heading off other places. So the real rubber is hitting the road now. We've had sort of a blessed existence in some respects over the last few years in terms of the opportunities that the pandemic has presented locally, but now we're going up against these much bigger forces that are reasserting themselves. So there's a lot of, I think, there's some hard work ahead of you. I think you're looking at some of the really key structural issues in the district. I think the tertiary education one's hugely important. I think the talk about how easy we can make it for people to do business here, whether they're developers, whether they're wanting to open up a factory, all those things are hugely important. And, you know, celebrate those little wins we get along the way as well. So, again, thank you for your work and looking forward to seeing how this goes.
Thanks, Glenn. I've got Deputy Mayor Holborough up next, and then Councillor McCann, and then myself and Councillor Buswell write a reply.
Look, I'll be very brief because I'm aware we have a big agenda ahead of us, and we've already taken up quite a lot of your time today. So I just want to say a huge thank you for your work today. And I agree we've got pressures coming up, but one of the ways we can do that is to play to our strengths, which we're already doing with our food and beverage sector, and to some extent with our creative sector. I think we can do more in that space, and that's a chance for us to do a lot more as well. But fantastic work from the team. Thank you so much for doing this for us. It's just such great work. So thank you.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you. I'll be brief as well, not because we've got a huge day of work ahead of us, but my coffee cup's now empty. But I do really want to acknowledge that every conversation I hear around this table is about the great work that you've actually been doing, and just the breadth of work, and many of our questions are answered by we're still doing that work. So I apologise that we're asking the questions in advance, but it's really great to hear some great stuff that you're doing, and I do think that we should be having that discussion about where the board goes sooner rather than later, so that we can try and lock that commitment from our council and future councils that this work is really, really necessary. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Apologies for the awful questions, and hopefully you'll stay for morning tea.
Mayor Guru.
Yeah, just following up on that, just simple looking forward. Given all that has been said and appreciated in terms of the work you've put in, the depth of the work and the breadth of the vision, we need to get an entity sorted out as quickly as possible to make you much more effective. Thank you.
And certainly Tautoko, His Worship's comments, and Councillor McCann's as well. So just a couple, or just something from me, and then I'll go to Councillor Buswell in terms of right of reply. Look, you've had a lot of pats on the back today, but I think that it is certainly warranted and worth repeating. And so again, like Chris, Kim, Neil, Russell and Hamari, we couldn't sort of say enough how thankful we are for the work that you and the team have done. It's certainly, I go back to Councillor Buswell's comments around her reflection. I don't know whether Ange remembers, but when we were first elected as councillors, we didn't really have an ED team. We fought for a single position for what we called a handshake, which was someone to come and meet businesses or developers when they come into the foyer and we're looking at doing business here. That was the first position that was created, and it morphed into an ED team. And now we have a very strong and very capable team led by Mark and Ebra and so forth. And so certainly I sit here extremely proud of the work that you guys have done and the ED team and then the Kotahitanga team to look back over the last 6 years. And that's not a pat on the back for us in terms of the initial decision, but certainly just to see where it's come to today. And look, I've got nothing but compliments for the work that your team has done. For you, Neil, in terms of your reappointment, hasn't been mentioned, but you've always been open in terms of raising with me as Chair of Strategy and Ops discussions to be brought to the table. What I've seen today is quite a free and frank and honest commentary from the team in response to questions and so forth. And so again, it's quite heartening to see that the work that you've done. And Mark, to your team as well, the work, the support and the acknowledgement from Neil around the support from the ED team in the background. So thank you. To you, Councillor Buswell, will write a reply.
Just quickly, I'd also like to put a vote of thanks out to the colleagues around the table for the support that they've shown to the ED team, the Kotahitanga Board and so forth. So yeah, that's about it. It's been a really great morning. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. And I don't see any question or any hands up, online. So we're going to move to the recommendations with the additional recommendation. So found on page 146 with the addition. It's been moved and seconded, been debated. So all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. And just noting your ticks in that online, and that has been passed. Look, there was a passing comment about feeling free to stick around. I think we should break for 5 minutes for a coffee. If you want to have a chat with elected members for a few minutes, feel free. And then we'll be back in at 20 past 11 for the remainder of the agenda.
Thank you for your support as well. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Neil. And thanks to the Dem Services team for the control of the lights. We had you getting a good workout there around the table. Just to make sure that those on Zoom are aware, we are just stopping for a quick coffee break for 5 minutes.